Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and greetings from Reno, where I am getting a quickie podcast divorce from Josh for making me sit through this movie.
You're going to spend 6 weeks in Reno just so you don't have to discuss this movie with me.
I usually spend 4 days there every year for the Cordillera Film Festival, so 6 weeks is an extended version. But as you know, this movie feels like 6 weeks to watch.
Well, I disagree. I think this is a very zippy, fast-paced movie that goes by
zippy
quickly.
2 hours and 13 minutes.
Yeah,
there.
I mean, it's not a short movie, but I feel like it moves quickly for the most part. Other than there's a interlude in the film in the middle that I'm sure we'll talk about that is maybe not so fast-paced. But the rest of it, all the dialogue and the character interactions. Anyway, Jason is ready to go to tear this movie apart. But what is that movie? We are here in our season on the films of 1939, and this is my pick, which is The Women from director George Cukor, based on the hit 1936 Broadway play by Clare Boothe, which ran for 600 plus performances on Broadway. And the film version was written by Anita Loos and Jane Murfin, starring Norma Shearer, Rosalind Russell, Joan Crawford, Paulette Goddard, Mary Boland, Joan Fontaine, and a massive cast, all of women, more than 130 speaking parts in this film. And just as in the play, only women in this film. We never see, they talk about the male characters a lot, which could be potentially one of the criticisms of this film. And in fact, the tagline, the advertising tagline for the film, I don't know about the play, but for the film, the tagline says it's all about men. And certainly that is what they focus on. But those male characters are always off screen. Only women, including even the animals, the pets that they have. They made sure to get only female animals to appear in this film.
But George Cukor, the director, is a man.
He is. Although at least there's female screenwriters. So at this time in Hollywood, I don't know if there were any working female directors, but basically between Dorothy Arzner and Ida Lupino, I'm not sure if within the studio system there were any female directors.
And you mentioned Anita Loos. She's the first female screenwriter in Hollywood. We mentioned her when we did Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which she also wrote, Josh.
Yeah, that she wrote up the play, the source material for that as well. So yeah, screenwriters, I feel like it was much more common for there to be female screenwriters at this time, but basically no women who were directors. So I think George Cukor does an excellent job with this, but obviously Jason's going to disagree with me about everything here.
Let me just say, obviously Cukor is a legend. I love the Philadelphia story. So let's chill out here on that. I mean, he's won Best Director. He's been nominated for 4 or 5 times, but this one,
yeah. Well, I think we can agree there. George Cukor is a legend and has made many great films. I think this is one of them. So this movie, again, was based on a very, very popular play. It was itself a success at the box office, although not as huge a success as it could have been, perhaps, grossing $2.27 million on its budget of $1.68 million. As always in this season, these are kind of estimated numbers and may include the re-release from 1947, where it picked up some extra money as well during that time. But generally considered a success. And not by Jason, but by many other people and by critics too. Critics were generally very positive about this film. And I figured to go with the theme, we might as well get all women critics here to quote in this episode. And I know that we've been having maybe a shortage of old-timey newspaper speak in the reviews, which I was excited for this season, but I feel like we're going to maybe make up for it here with the reviews of the women. So that's exciting.
I just was excited that there was a food dish in this film that I had never heard of, Pancakes Barbara.
Yeah, did you look that up? Was that what was the egg thing that we just talked about?
Oh yeah, eggs kibby.
Right,
or whatever.
Exactly. Is it like that?
It looks like it's like a fat crepe, and then you put whipped cream and hot chocolate sauce on it.
Well, that sounds healthy. I'm all for it.
Some ice cream, some blanched walnuts, Pancakes Barbara.
Yeah. Is that served anywhere anymore, or does it go out of style after the 1930s?
Well, I've never heard of it, so I don't think it's in style because I would have known that. But
Yeah, you are pretty knowledgeable about those things.
yeah,
So,
and
would you?
yeah, I'd eat pancakes, Barbara. It'd have to be a dessert. I wonder if you could do like a savory version of it. Maybe put some bacon on there and 2 eggs or something, and
Yeah.
some
Would it pair with the
syrup.
eggs kibby, do you think, or those don't go together? They're both
Well,
breakfasty,
it's
right?
just going to be carbs on carbs because eggs kibby is basically toads in a hole, right? So you're putting. I mean, what if you combine them and you cut the hole in the pancake, the crepe, and you did pancakes Barbara kibby?
I don't know. I don't know. But I think you should give it a try and report back when we get to the epilogue. We're going to get you a whole menu of 1930s food to eat by the time we get to the end of this season, and you can report on your meal at the end.
I'm all for that.
Yeah. So, critic-wise, generally, especially these female critics, were very positive about it. Mildred Martin in the Philadelphia Inquirer said, Miss Booth's poisonous portrait of her sex has had neither its claws trimmed nor its venom removed in MGM's lavish screen translation. In fact, the film is as amusingly libelous of the girls as ever, though its language has been to some extent fumigated, and though a certain slapstick inclination on the part of players and director George Cukor serves to soften the sting.
No claws, no venom.
No? I mean, I was trying to find what exactly were the differences between the stage version and this version, and it doesn't seem like there were like structural changes per se, and I wondered if the ending, which is definitely the 1930s sexist ending, had been mandated by like the production code, but it seems like that's actually from the source material, and it's mainly just certain words and references like, virgin or whore or things like that they could say on stage that they can't say in the movies.
So can it be sexist if it was written by a woman and performed by all women?
Of course it can. Absolutely. You think there are not women who buy into the sexism?
I'm just saying, this is one of my problems with the movie. Like, what is the message I'm supposed to take away from this thing?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's fair. Like, of all the potential criticisms here, like the idea of the very sexist tone of it, I think is something that I can be on board with in terms of criticizing the film, that it does kind of undermine the idea of this movie as a celebration of women when the message, at least as far as our main character played by Norma Shearer goes, is that women should subvert themselves to their husbands and overlook extramarital affairs and just forgive and move on. And yeah, I'm with you on that point.
I mean, I saw Dave's letterbox where he referred to it as the good old days.
Yeah, we know Dave, the regressive patriarch over there, right?
This is one of my main criticisms of it. I was like, I mean, we go on this long journey with this character only for her to pretty much end up where she started. Like, oh, should I divorce him? No, I love my husband. He can go bang someone else and I'll be here for him.
I mean, I don't necessarily approve of where she ends up, but I think the point of the journey, the point of the film is that she has to kind of go through all these experiences to understand that, or to come to a more complex or fuller understanding of how her marriage could or should work.
And I don't think it was complex at all. I think we've seen much better stories of adultery and couples trying to put the pieces back together, Dave.
Mm. Oh, right. Pieces. Got it. Mm-hmm. That's where you're going with that.
Yeah.
So another positive review here. May Tenay, get it,
Ooh.
is the pseudonym of a number of female film critics over the course of nearly 30 years or I think actually maybe closer to 50 years even, at the Chicago Tribune. So whoever this was in 1939, May Tenay said, "This picture, screened from the naughty stage play, was not an easy one to adapt. Objectionalities have been deleted without inducing anemia. The production snaps and sparkles and maintains remarkable coherency considering the mass of incoordinate material introduced. Dialogue is rare without being raw, as it was in the play. The acting is slick, every bit of it. Rosalind Russell, I would say, contributes the outstanding performance. Director George Cukor has certainly learned about women from somebody, for his hand on the reins was a sure and cajoling one. As one woman to another, don't miss the women, girls, but better leave Papa at home.
Good thing that he learned about women from somebody, Josh.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think this is elsewhere in the piece, the review, she talks about those screenwriters, how one of the reasons that she thinks it worked is because they assigned this to these female screenwriters. So she's kind of contrasting him there.
I mean, this is the second allusion to this naughty play. What is so naughty about the play?
Well, I mean, you have to remember that it's 1939. And I mean, I think one of the things that's naughty about the play is probably that language that had to be toned down for this film. So we don't see that here. But just the idea of these female characters being so catty and sabotaging each other and having affairs and getting divorced, even if Mary ultimately comes around to this sort of wholesome sexist place, other characters in the film, supporting characters, are allowed to be a lot messier. And I think that's what they're referring to here too.
Speaking of these female screenwriters, did you know that F. Scott Fitzgerald did an early draft of this?
Yeah, so not a female screenwriter there, but unclear how many of his contributions made it here versus our credited writers. Anita Loos and Jane Murfin is the other screenwriter here.
Right. I'm a big Rosalind Russell fan. As you know, we've talked about His Girl Friday and my love for it. But I feel like they all kind of get mishmashed together in this one.
Really? You didn't feel like she stood out at all as Sylvia Fowler?
I mean, really, the only one who stood out to me was Joan Crawford, and she was the villain.
Right. Well, Sylvia's kind of a villain, too. I mean, you could even argue that Sylvia is the bigger villain because she kind of instigates a lot of this.
Yeah, no, I think it was Joan Crawford and the Countess were the two.
Yes.
That, really
the Countess Delage. I think a lot of these, I mean, you saw this before I did this time. I've seen it before, but, talking to you and hearing your complaints, I thought, oh yeah, it's true. There are a lot of characters in this film, and maybe I will feel like they're not particularly distinctive as I watched it this time. And I disagree. I mean, some of the real tertiary characters who don't do much maybe don't make a huge impression, but I felt like all of the main characters and even kind of secondary characters had very distinctive personalities and arcs to them.
Well, of course you did. It's your pick.
Right. Well, I mean, as I said, it's possible that I would have felt differently about it, watching it this time. That's happened, right? And I hadn't seen it in a while. You picked one movie one time that you hated.
Well, I'd never seen it though, so that doesn't count. But anyway, I don't think that there were these definitive lines in these characters, but I do think you hit upon something that, because as you know, there's more than 130 speaking roles here. Right. I think some streamlining could have really done this film well.
Yeah, I don't agree. I feel like everything in this movie is fantastic. And I mean, I don't want to say essential because the movie could exist without certain things, but everything in here I thought was enjoyable and valuable to watch this time.
Well, it's been a good run, guys.
This is far from the worst of a movie I think that I've recommended or that we have watched where you have disliked it. I'm sure there have been plenty of movies that you've disliked more that I've tried to defend.
I mean, I actually was thinking about this. I mean, we'll have to wait till the ratings, but I bet this is going to be the lowest rated personal pick of the other two. That, say if it was my pick and you guys were rating it.
Right.
I think this is going to be the lowest rating.
It's possible. I don't know. I'll have to look. I feel like you've picked a couple things that I've really disliked.
Well, yeah, but Dave usually comes through.
Dave bumped up the average there.
That's what I mean with the other two.
Yeah. So, well, we'll see. We'll get to that. So finally, critic-wise, Catherine Howard in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram said, "The play was screamingly funny, and the audience, which was predominantly feminine, laughed and laughed at their own weaknesses and vanities, but secretly squirmed when situations struck too close to home. As one member of the female sex trying to be honest, we'll have to confess that we squirmed, but also admit that we saw many of our sisters in their true life characters. The women is crammed with smart dialogue. The only difficulty is that the audience is in a continuous uproar, and you miss numerous wisecracks, many of which will be tossed about for weeks to come. If for no other reason, the movie is worth the price just to see Rosalind Russell and Paulette Goddard engaging in a battle of biting and hair pulling at a Reno dude ranch."
Okay.
Okay, that's Jason's response. He's already given up.
I mean, I just don't agree with it. And I mean, this is like, for instance, I just rewatched Mean Girls the other day, which is basically an all female led film, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a, if we were doing a piecing it together, right? This could be a piece for Mean Girls.
Sure.
Yeah, I just think that's a much better version of this subject matter in obviously a different setting. But yeah. I didn't connect with this one, Josh.
Right. No, I'm getting that. And I like Mean Girls, but I definitely think this was better. So, all right, Jason, obviously you had not seen this before, but you're saying you have seen some George Cukor films that you've liked.
Yeah. And I mean, all these actresses are legends, right? So,
yeah,
I went in with an open mind, Josh, and it just didn't. Sorry, man. I apologize, Josh.
No, you don't have to apologize for having your own opinion about the movie.
I apologize that you have made me watch such a terrible film, Josh.
Yeah. All right. Dave, had you seen this before?
I had not. I also went in with an open mind. I'd mentioned it in Letterboxd. I loved the opening credits, but then it just didn't hold up to that the whole time.
Yeah, the opening credits are fun, where they show the main characters and like an animal that it sort of relates to them in terms of their personalities.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to like that, but again, issues there. One, there's so many of them; it's impossible to keep track right up front, right?
Well, yeah, because you haven't gotten to know them yet. It's just like a parade of like faces, but you will get to know them over the course of the movie.
Yes, but I also don't think like, oh, Joan Crawford's a panting leopard. I didn't really get that one. The Countess is a monkey, I guess, because she swings from relationship to relationship. Like, I just
kind of hyperactive and always, being, jumping around or whatever, I guess.
It felt like a lot of work to get any of these things there.
Yeah. Okay. So you lost you right from the moment it began, basically, is what you're saying. Before a character even spoke.
I was intrigued. I was like, oh, cool. I'm intrigued. But then I was like detrigued after that, Josh.
Yeah. Okay. I see. Well, I had seen this multiple times. This is the third time I've seen this. I watched it just at home one time, I think just as like, hey, this is a classic, I should check it out. And I really enjoyed it. And so when they showed it at the TCM Classic Film Festival in 2012, and I was covering that for a no longer existing, but great movie website called Not Coming to a Theater Near You, I requested to write about this film. So I wrote a piece on it back in 2012, which is still there, even though that website shut down like 10 years ago. It's well preserved, which is rare on the internet. So shout out to Rumsey Taylor, who ran that website. Excellent.
All right,
there.
Rumsey.
Yeah. So I had seen this and considered it, written about it, analyzed it, whatever in the past, and really liked it, as I said, both of those times, but it has been a while. And I thought, maybe, given Jason's response, maybe I'll agree. Maybe I won't be as enthused this time, but I really enjoyed it this time, I think, just as much. And right from the beginning, like maybe not the opening credits, I'm sort of split between you guys. Like, I think they're kind of cute, but they're not really like a great moment necessarily. And I'm with you, Jason. It is maybe a bit of a stretch that they decide we have to get an animal for all of these characters. We have to figure one out, and how does that really fit? But I mean, from the moment it begins, the actual story in that salon with the camera, the long tracking shot of going through the different rooms, and the set design, which is so spectacular in this film, and all the overlapping dialogue that you get there. I was in it completely from beginning to end this time. So I'm sorry that you guys were tortured by it.
Yeah, it was a rough go for me, Josh.
Yeah. Well, do you want to say anything else about the background of this movie?
Josh, did you know that Claudette Colbert, Carol Lombard, and Marion Davies almost starred in this film?
That would have been fantastic.
Yeah, Gregory LaCava was again directed at one point. And then my other favorite thing is that since the three leads, which, they were all such huge names by then, Josh, right? You had, Crawford and Shearer and Rosalind Russell. They were all such stars. And in classic Hollywood fashion, they acted as such that Cukor made sure to constantly call them to the set simultaneously, because if he had called one earlier, then they wouldn't have felt like they were as big as the other ones. And one time it didn't work, and the offended star stayed in her dressing room for a long time.
Yeah, I believe that these Hollywood divas, but it's appropriate for the subject matter of this film. I feel like, even
I
though
agree.
that was probably annoying for George Cukor in trying to make the film, but it fits with the characters. So we'll come back and talk our general thoughts on the women and hear more about why Jason hates it. All right. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1939, we're talking about my pick, which is George Cukor's The Women, a movie that I love and that I still love. This is my third time seeing it. And Jason, I think we've already here established that you really dislike this, but I want to ask you, was there something that you did like?
I mean, like I said, I thought the Countess was a fun character. It's just like, in a way, everything was too long. Like the Dude Ranch sequence could have been a little more fun if it was tightened up a little bit. I feel like you had mentioned that opening with that cool camera work, but there was so many people to keep track of right away. It just got tough. And then some of the confrontations between like Shearer and Crawford or whatever were nice. So look, it's just, I think less would have been more here, Josh.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think obviously, again, as I said, I think everything in here is really good. In terms of that opening, like it is overwhelming and you are dropped right into it. And I think you could feel like, oh, wait, what am I supposed to focus on here? But the truth is that most of that is just sort of like color. It's just background. It's not until you get into the manicurist gossiping about Mary Haynes and her husband cheating on her that we get to something that we actually need to pay attention to. And by that point, it's clear. I think, the background noise has faded away. We can focus and we're given enough information about who are these people and what are their relationships to that we can see how the story begins. So I think even if you're a little jarred at the beginning, you can pretty well focus on what's going on fairly soon.
Yes, but then, right. So even if I give you that, then it's another barrage of like 12 characters right afterwards and how they interact. So
yeah,
it was just overwhelming. And, I even think that, like I said, like, I think everything could have been trimmed and edited. So even like the quirky, fun, fast dialogue, I think got lost a lot of times.
Yeah, I mean, I think the dialogue is really like if you did, if you edited this down, you would lose so many witty lines and great exchanges, and all the performances are so good. I think even in those smaller parts, and part of the reason that you can, I feel like, get a handle on those characters where maybe they don't have that many lines or the writing isn't all that distinctive for them is because all the performances down the line in this cast are really good, and you get these lesser characters. And you get a sense of them right away because the performances give you that.
Yeah, look, I'm not knocking any of the acting, but there have been plenty of movies with good actors or great casts that just haven't materialized. And I know, like you said, Josh, this is a renowned film. You're not the only one who loves it.
Right. I want to make that clear. I feel like I've picked some movies in the past that are sort of cult-y or not universally beloved, but this is not one of them.
No, it's fine. It's like totally fine. Like I'm in the minority on this one, but,
right.
But I'm not really in the awesome movie year minority because I know Dave didn't like it. And when I saw Dave and Gina at the movies, Gina pulled me aside to tell me how much she did. And I don't even think she sat through the whole thing.
Well, right. To be fair, Gina didn't watch the whole movie.
Yeah, she failed.
Yeah, but you're saying to be fair, like, yes,
I would not, as a critic, give you my assessment of a film if I had not watched all of it.
Right, but I think her point was, hey, I am so despondent at how terrible I'm feeling watching this movie, how little I'm enjoying it, that I will not subjugate myself to such matters anymore.
Right, and hey, she's not obligated to do that. Of course, she's not on this podcast. She's not a critic. She's just watching for her own enjoyment, and I'm not knocking Gina for saying, hey, this movie isn't for me. I'm going to stop watching. I just think that if you're going to give it, like, if you're going to use that as supporting evidence in your case against the film, you can't go with someone who didn't actually watch the whole movie.
Oh my God, Dave, you're going to let him talk about your wife like that?
No, I'm
If I may say-
I'm trying to criticize you, Jason, not Gina.
Yeah, but see what I did? I deflected it like I'm one of these gossip columnists
Yeah,
from the
you are.
1930s. I could
Good job.
hit it somewhere else.
I want to say, like, I admit I don't know as much classic Hollywood as I should. So I'm kind of coming to this from a slightly unique point of view, in that all of that overlapping dialogue and all of these characters just kind of going 100 miles a minute. I had so much trouble figuring out who the main character was because I didn't recognize the actresses. So I think that's also a difficulty for someone like me coming into this.
I mean, but
Let me just say, Josh, it kind of reiterates what I'm saying, because there's so many of them. Like, it is tough to, again, keep track of blah, 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 and I like ensemble stuff and, windy roads,
Sure.
but I think it was too much. And I think, we're talking about Cukor, and like I mentioned, his Philadelphia story, right? That to me is a much better iteration of that kind of quick overlapping, fun dialogue.
I mean, I love the Philadelphia story, and I think it's great at that. And I mean, you want to talk about, isn't His Girl Friday, Jason, which you love, doesn't that have like a world record for the speed of its dialogue or something like that?
Right.
I think it does.
Right, but I'm not knocking that. But that was one female and two men, right? So it's like, it's much easier if that was three females or three men or whatever iteration. It's three characters versus 78 characters, right? So
Right.
it's just tough to keep track. And I this is obviously a major style, and I don't think there's a better actress than Rosalind Russell for this type of film, because like you just mentioned, His Girl Friday, right? But this one I think is too much.
Yeah. I mean, I guess going to that, like, I understand what you're saying, Dave, is that you're not familiar with who you're not going to recognize on sight, Norma Shearer or Joan Crawford or Rosalind Russell or any of these people. And
Right.
I mean, that's fair, especially because Norma Shearer in particular has been sort of lost to time or whatever versus those other two. But I feel like, first of all, in that opening credits scene, which you loved, it gives you a very clear picture of every one of these people, and she's the first one who's clearly the main character.
Well, I remembered all the animals. I just didn't remember
so if the animals had appeared, right? But I also, again, I don't know. I feel like, to me, as soon as they're like, Mary Haynes, blah, 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 like the manicurist is giving you this gossip, you're like, okay, Mary Haynes is the main character of this film. And then she shows up and she says, I'm Mary Haynes, or whatever. Maybe she doesn't say that. But yeah, there are a lot of people surrounding her, and it may take a while to figure out who those people are. And there was definitely one character, at least, I forget the actress, but who's like she's sort of like an old maid spinster, and she's a writer, and she shows up in one of those group scenes at the beginning, and then she's gone for a really long time and then shows up later. And I was like, who is this again? And that's, I understand. But I feel like, if you give this movie 10 minutes, 12 minutes or something, you will really clearly understand who Mary Haynes is and that she's the main character.
But we gave it 2 hours and 13 minutes, and he's telling you that it was
right. Well, but by the end of the movie, Dave, you realized who the main character was.
I would say so, yes.
I would hope
Josh,
so.
I think the gossip columnist you're talking about is an actual gossip columnist, Hedda Hopper,
Yes.
who played Dolly Doopster, I think. And at the height of her fame or kind of, reach as a columnist, 35 million people were reading her columns, which is great. But not great was all the blacklisting she helped do of screenwriters for the, McCarthyism era.
Yeah. I mean, the gossip, Hedda Hopper, and I forget the name now of her like primary rival at the time, who was another the gossip columnist who also they made their careers on destroying people. And so, yeah, they're famous, but you're right. She not only contributed to the blacklist, but even before that, the sort of purpose of gossip columns in this era was to take people down. And we see some of that in this movie, right? And these characters aren't even meant to be famous actresses or whatever, but they're Park Avenue socialites. They're well known in the New York social scene, especially during the Depression. And that's one thing that I feel like doesn't come across in this movie as much. But this was also kind of a satire of the attitudes of rich women at the time. These women had the luxury of focusing all their energy on their husbands' affairs and gossiping about each other or whatever, because they weren't poor and standing on bread lines or whatever. And that's part of what's going on here too. But yeah, that gossip columnist, even though Hedda Hopper, I'm sure, enjoyed doing a cameo as essentially herself, she is an essential part of the machine that destroys people like Mary Haynes here.
Right. I'm going to go back to Joan Crawford, who I think, we've talked about multiple times this season, obviously a legend. Like that to me, I know she's the bad guy, but that's the most clearly delineated character in the film. And when she gets her comeuppance, I like that she just rolls with it. She kind of feels like, hey, I made my bed. I'm going to lie in it until I find a better bed to lie in.
Right. I mean, I totally agree. And I think one of the sort of counterbalances to the idea of this movie being super sexist in terms of its storyline about Mary Haines, about Norma Shearer's character, is that both Joan Crawford's character, Crystal Allen, and Rosalind Russell's character, Sylvia Fowler, who are the sort of ostensible villains here, are very easy to root for and very easy to regard as the more feminist sort of people positions within this story. And maybe that wasn't the intent of the filmmakers at the time, but I feel like what they created was something with this wide range of women who, and like you said, that's a great moment at the end where we feel like, Mary Haines has defeated her, right? Or whatever. And she's just like, yeah, what? Shit happens. I'm going to land on my feet. It's what I do. And you believe it. And that's great.
I do. But to defend Dave, which, as you know, not something I'm a fan of doing.
You're very reluctant.
I mean, I could tell you, like you said, I could tell you who Mary Haines is. I could tell you who Crystal is, her rival. The Rosalind Russell character, I think it's a little lost in there. I think the Countess you recognize, and obviously the kid, little Mary, you recognize. But I couldn't tell you anything about Joan Fontaine, who played Peggy at this point in time, who's a huge star, right? I couldn't tell you who Edith is. I couldn't tell you who Miriam is, played by Paulette Goddard. Like, all these just kind of ran together. And I was like, wait, you did what? Who are you again? What's going on here? I literally, before we recorded, Josh, because I always do the research, as you know.
Of course.
I read the summary, and I was even confused by the summary of what I watched.
Well, yeah, I mean, Edith is another character who kind of shows up in the beginning and then disappears for a while because she's not involved when they take their trip to Reno. And that's where we meet the Countess, and that's where we meet Paulette Goddard's character. And then when we kind of come back to New York, then Edith shows up again. So I think that's fair. And she doesn't have much of an arc, but I feel like Joan Fontaine's character has a great arc, and her arc like parallels Mary because she too is going to get divorced. She joins Mary on the trip to Reno and then discovers that she's pregnant, and she also reconciles with her husband. And it's sort of, it's meant to be this early like sign for Mary that, hey, you know what, she can do it. This is what I should be doing as well. And I think Paulette Goddard, just as a performer, makes such an impression when she shows up on the train when, because she doesn't show up in the movie until I don't know, is that halfway through maybe or something like that when they go to Reno?
Yeah.
And she is key to like Sylvia's arc because she's the one who is the catalyst for Sylvia's own divorce. She's having an affair with Sylvia's husband and she's going to marry him. And I thought that was a great example too of the movie showing these different paths, because even though she's essentially a homewrecker, right? She's taken Sylvia's husband away. She becomes one of Mary's greatest allies, and we don't judge her. We're not opposed to her. She's not a villain at all in this film. And yet she still has engaged in this extramarital affair. So I thought those characters were very clear.
Well, that's good. I mean, I wish I didn't get all of that as quickly as you did, clearly, so, I mean, you're explaining to me and I'm like, yeah, I kind of remember that,
Right.
So
right.
It was a lot to keep track of, this might be a stupid thing, but it's true, like, obviously this is 1939. This is all black and white except for the Technicolor sequence.
Yeah.
But I feel like we could have done a better job, delineating characters via wardrobe, via styles. They didn't really, each have their own style. I didn't feel like.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, I feel like Sylvia has this kind of more over the top style than the others. And Mary is often dressed in like pantsuits and stuff where she's more like practical or whatever. But yeah, I mean, the lack of color means that you can't always tell if these characters have a signature color or something like that they're wearing. And I think they are all meant to have this sort of high fashion sense because they are all these upscale housewives in this area of society. There's probably a limited range of acceptable fashions for them to be wearing at this time period.
Let's talk about that Technicolor sequence.
Yeah.
When you first saw it, I guess it was reinserted into the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's been reinserted for decades. I mean, it was taken out at some point, I guess maybe. I wonder if that re-release in 1947 included it or not. I'm not sure, but early like home video releases and maybe when it was shown on TV and things like that took it out. But certainly by the time I watched it, when it had been released on DVD, I mean, it was like 2006 or something. So it had certainly been added in. And when I watched it again, the DVD that I got from the library has the black and white fashion show sequence, which is an alternative available on there. And I didn't watch that because the fashion show part, as much as it's like, I appreciate for it like complete insanity that they included it goes on a little long.
It doesn't. I mean, look. So. The costume designer Adrian, I guess, who was a huge deal and known for his amazing, work as a designer, which is cool. And but you're watching this movie, and then all of a sudden we're in Technicolor, and we're watching this fashion show, and it's like, I don't think it added anything to the movie, did it?
Right. No, I mean, there's arguments that are made for how it does add to the movie. And I don't mind watching it. It's so ridiculous that I just find it amusing to watch. And it's definitely of a piece with the kinds of things. I don't know that there's any other movie that stops in the middle for a fashion show, although there may be. But it reminded me a lot of dream ballets, which are a huge thing in musicals in the 1930s and 40s, and I think even into the 50s, where there are these long wordless sequences. Even if it's a musical where the characters sing, there are these long sequences where it's just sort of like abstract representations of the characters' moods via dance. And some of those go like An American in Paris ends with like an 18-minute dream ballet. It's fucking insane. And it reminded me of that, which was definitely a thing in this era.
And you know how I feel about the movies of the 1950s. Not all of them, but you understand.
Right.
But Josh, you know who agreed with me on this sequence is George Cukor.
Yeah.
So he didn't like it and wanted out of the movie.
Right. And so that's why I wonder if maybe if he had the clout by 1947 to have it taken out for that re-release. I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean, he was as big a director as there was at the time.
Absolutely. For decades he was. But I will say that, Jason, maybe one of the other reasons that the fashions all look similar is because, as you said, Adrian was such a huge superstar that if he's designing all the costumes, they all look like Adrian's fashions or whatever. And there isn't as much of a range in terms of style.
It's really unfair to, kind of say this, but I'm like thinking of like Sex and the City, where you have four well-off leads, right? But they're kind of all clearly delineated in their look. And I know it's different decades and it's 4 versus 37 here, but, I just needed some clarification on a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think Sex and the City is another one that if you were talking about puzzle pieces and influences, this is a huge one.
Yeah, of course.
Sex and the City also has 100 plus episodes or whatever to give you a fuller picture of those characters. And this movie has, even if you thought it was too long, only 130 minutes. But again, I don't know. To me, I felt like the acting and the personalities made up for the fact that maybe their fashion senses and hairstyles were similar.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, I don't mind the similar fashion styles. I just think, like I said, we could have used some streamlining to help, a little, like I said, less is more here, and as opposed to more is less.
Right. Well, to me, it's more is more. But I mean, I wouldn't deny that this is a very lavish, over the top, excessive film. Again, the set design in this movie is fucking crazy. Like Crystal Allen's bathroom. Come on.
Oh yeah, towards the end there. That yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Look, and Cukor, like you were talking about that opening sequence and how he moves the camera and everything.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah. Again, there's if it's all dessert, then is anything sweet, Josh?
Well, I think there's a lot of bitter in this film. I mean, that's the point, is that these women go after each other. They experience heartbreak. I mean, all of them, not only Mary, but Joan Fontaine's character and the Countess, as much as she is sort of ridiculous in her laments of l'amour, she says this because she really feels it. So I didn't feel like it was all just surface, definitely, although the surface stuff was great.
Well, I think we just are on opposite ends of the women's spectrum here, Josh.
We are indeed. I do want to mention, because I know you probably want to wrap up and that's fair, but I have to get in what I think is maybe the best scene in this film, which is crazy because it involves none of the main stars. And honestly, one of my favorite movie scenes ever, which is the scene between Mary's housekeeper and her cook as they are recounting to each other the argument that Mary and Stephen have when they decide to get divorced. And of course, we can't see Stephen on screen because the concept of the film is that we never see the male characters, but we have to convey what's going on between them. And so this maid character has been eavesdropping, and she comes down and she's breathless and she's telling the cook all about what's going on. And these fantastic performances between these two characters who basically do nothing in the rest of the film. But it not only gives you this very clear sense of the argument that our main character has had without having Norma Shearer actually even appear, but in the way that they relate it to each other, it gives you a little sense of how these two characters who we don't really know anything about feel about marriage and about extramarital affairs and what's going on. And I just think that's a fantastic scene.
That's wild to me that you say it's one of your favorite movie scenes ever.
I mean, I don't know, I'd have to make a list, but it's one thing that has stuck in my mind like very prominently about this movie.
I thought you might have brought up the cowpoke, the ranch hand, or someone who's always singing, and giving that good country wisdom to the ladies. Or
and her country wisdom includes that like her husband beats her and she just goes with it. Maybe I deserve it sometimes. Like
they all do that. This is what I mean. Like, you want to talk about like the dichotomy. Really is not that much, Mary's mom, the same thing. You got to just, boys will be boys, right?
Right. Well, I mean, Mary's mom also, and Mary even says this to her, is meant to be a representative of a previous generation. And Mary says like, hey, that's not how things are now. Even in 1939, that's not how we look at things. And I don't think it's meant to be that Mary comes around to her mother's point of view, but that she has a sort of integration of that with her own assertion of her autonomy within the relationship.
Man, I'm glad you liked it, Josh.
All right. Well, we'll spare you. Dave, did you have anything you wanted to add about this?
I mean, there were some very funny moments like sprinkled throughout, and that's what kept me from, really disliking it, so I definitely some good sense of humor here and there, as well as some good filmmaking. But
yeah, I asked if we could get Gina on, but Dave said she's not allowed out right now.
She's in the kitchen barefoot.
Damn right.
Yeah, I think that's another thing is that, I mean, if I haven't made, like, this is a very funny movie. I laughed throughout the whole film. And I feel like even if you're frustrated with the retrograde attitudes, the dialogue is so sharp and so funny that you can enjoy it that way. But obviously you can't.
I think I've given better examples of those type of movies with that similar
Yeah,
style.
I mean, those are great examples too. Both Philadelphia Story and His Girl Friday, involved with people involved in this film. Obviously classics for a reason as well. So Jason, you want to rate this out of 5 animal representations of women?
Sure. I was going to say quickie divorces, but that's
sure. 5 quickie divorces that take 6 weeks.
Yeah, 6-week quickies. It gets 2 from me, Josh. Two quickie divorces, and it was a slog, my friend.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that you feel this way. I give it a 4 out of 5. 4 quickie divorces. I really enjoyed this movie every time I have seen it. I still really enjoy it. It's absolutely one of my favorites. It is number 1 on my 1939 top 10 list, and I'm going to leave it there.
I hope we break it this season with something.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. So, Dave, how would you rate this?
I'm going 2.5. I didn't hate watching it. I had a good time, but I didn't exactly love it or anything.
All right. Well, I'll take your extra half star there, Dave. Thank you.
Yeah, Dave, you'll have to, Dave, go through every episode we've ever done for someone's personal pick and tell me if that's the lowest.
Get right on that, Dave. Yeah. Do some math too, which we're always great at.
We'll let you guys know in the next segment what Dave comes back with.
Yeah, we'll come back and talk about the legacy of the women. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1939, we have been talking about my pick, The Women, which I feel like we've, torn it apart plenty.
Well, hey, I'm going to get, yes, we have, but also like you defended your stance. So all good, bro.
Right. No, absolutely. I just mean like, we'll move on now and talk about kind of where things went for it. We'll talk about the legacy of it because it was very popular. And so it was remade and remounted. I mean, the play itself was also very popular too. So between movies and plays, it's returned many times. There was a TV anthology episode version of it in 1955. And then in 1956, the musical remake called The Opposite Sex, which I'm kind of curious to see and is not very well regarded, but I didn't have a chance to watch it. But to me, the worst decision they make that is in none of these other versions is that they include the male characters, which I feel like is the main concept of this.
Well, yeah. So if you're going to do that, I mean, Jack Benny, the legendary comedian, did a sketch parody of The Women with an all-male cast. And then,
was it an all-male cast playing women, or was it an all-male cast playing men?
Well, that I have to find out, but it's from 1939. So obviously this was, as you said, right there, big hit, ripe for parody. But yeah, that would be interesting to know. Because I mean, even if they were all playing women, that doesn't mean it can't.
No, I'm just wondering because I feel like there's got to be some kind of like drag queen version of this. This seems ripe for that, right? But maybe not on the radio in 1939.
Oh yeah, I would think the musical might have the drag queens.
But not in 1956 either. So maybe eventually.
But Josh, you did see the 2008 Diane English directorial debut starring Meg Ryan, Eva Mendes, Annette Bening, Jada Pinkett Smith, Bette Midler, and Deborah Messing.
I did, and it's very bad. And I think I didn't remember a lot about it other than that I didn't like it, but I did look over my review that I wrote when it came out. And I think my problem was that, like, it's hard to update, if you want to retain what the story is about. As we said, it does have very retrograde sexist attitudes. It's hard to retain the structure of the story, but update it to 2008 values or whatever. And I think she sort of split the difference in a way that didn't work. But even worse than that is that it was not witty. It was not funny. The performances were flat, and it just didn't work, even though there's a lot of talented people in the cast.
It is hard to do stuff like that. I think I told you, back in my Hollywood Minute days, right? One project that they asked us if we could crack was Mr. Mom, like a remake of Mr. Mom, right?
Yeah.
But the whole idea of like, hey, I'm a guy and I stay at home and take care of my kids, like, is totally like there's nothing new or comedic or not normal about that, right? So like.
Right.
So it took me a year to figure out how to do that. And then by that time, they had already moved on. So.
Well, I mean, I feel like that's fair because part of the issue, too, is that, like, well, why are we remaking this then if we take away the central theme of it? And that's the same that goes for this film, too, I think.
Yes. And Josh, none of us have seen the 1977 made-for-television Rainer Werner Fassbender. Guess it was a movie, Women in New York?
Yeah, it's a feature film, but it was made for German TV. And I'd be curious to see that, too. I found it's not available for whatever reason in the U.S., even though Fassbender is a huge filmmaker, and I think most of his films are available. But there was I found it on YouTube as clearly like a rip from a VHS or something, but it didn't have any subtitles and I didn't have time to watch it anyway. But I'd be curious to see that. I'd be curious to see the musical from 1956, even if both of them maybe aren't great, just to see how this has been reinterpreted. The play also remains popular. It was revived on Broadway in 1973 and in 2001. And the 2001 version has a pretty impressive, eclectic cast with Cynthia Nixon, speaking of Sex and the City, as Mary Haynes, Kristen Johnston as Sylvia Fowler, Jennifer Tilly as Crystal Allen, Jennifer Coolidge as Edith. I mean, I don't know if it, worked or whatever, but I would have been fascinated to see that.
Yeah, I think the move here now is, we've talked about how expansive this is, right? Like, This is a series now. That's what you do if you're going to remake this. Now you focus on them and tell those stories over time.
I guess, but I mean, to me, not just this, but anything where that lately where it's like, oh, this 2-hour movie is now a 10-episode series. That's always a bad idea.
Well, clearly we're on opposite sides of Reno on this one, Josh.
We are indeed. So, as you said, George Cukor, one of the biggest legends in Hollywood in terms of directing. We mentioned the Philadelphia Story, which I also love. Gaslight, another major classic. Adam's Rib, which is Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn, one of their famous collaborations. And the 1954 version of A Star Is Born with Judy Garland. And he won an Oscar for directing My Fair Lady and worked all the way until his final film in 1981.
Yeah, he was making movies from 1930 to 1981. How cool is that?
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, look, we didn't even mention he's done a David Copperfield, he's done a Romeo and Juliet. My Fair Lady's fun. I like that one. So
I think I haven't seen it since high school.
Mainly on the plains,
right? Yeah.
So Cukor definitely ignore all my bashing of this film and watch some other Cukor movies, please.
And I agree, like those ones that we mentioned are all really good. Norma Shearer, I find fascinating. I have seen quite a few of her films now, but as I said, compared especially to Joan Crawford and Rosalind Russell, she's not nearly as well known because she was a huge star
Yeah.
in the silent era and in the 30s. She won an Oscar for this film that actually has a lot of similarities with The Women, called The Divorcee from 1930, which is also quite good. But she retired from acting in 1942. This was one of her final films, and she was only 40 years old at that time and just gave it up and never acted again, shied away from publicity. And so she kind of faded away for a long time.
Yeah, I think she also starred in Cukor's Romeo and Juliet, and she was the first 5-time nominee for Best Actress.
Right. And 5-time nominee for Best Actress, all before 1942.
Right. It was like in a decade. She set the precedent for Meryl Streep.
Yes, yeah. But I think she's really good, and it's nice that people are rediscovering more of her stuff. I mean, partly, especially a lot of those like silent films and pre-code films weren't available for a long time, and they've become more available now. And I definitely recommend The Divorcee is quite good.
But you recommended this movie.
Right. Jason's not going to listen anymore if I recommend a movie from any era, I guess. Maybe now this has killed me. I don't know.
That's okay. Of course I will, Josh.
Of course. I know.
But we're going to talk about Joan Crawford. I'll let you cover the career aspect. But what I was really interested in, and I also would love to learn more about, is the way, she pulled off her own publicity campaign to create her image as this. She was a flapper, right? She was out at the parties, and she was known as, always in the mix of whatever was interesting. And she created her own star in the 1920s. Like, she kind of calculated something, which nowadays, whenever I see Taylor Swift on an NFL game, I hate that stuff. But reading about her doing it, I would like to learn more about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of these, especially female stars, they had to take charge in a certain way. Otherwise, they were just screwed over. I mean, and Joan Crawford was screwed over anyway, but certainly even more so if they weren't able to take charge of their own image or their own career decisions. And I mean, in the studio era, a lot of times women and men, actors, were not really able to take charge of their career decisions because studios just put them in whatever movies, as we've talked about in other episodes this season. So yeah, she's another one like Norma Shearer. She was a big star in the silent era, and I've never seen any Joan Crawford silent films. I've seen more later films. I think this might actually be the earliest Crawford film that I've seen, but of course she's known for later in her career when she made campy stuff like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane and Straight Jacket and Sudden Fear, all of which are quite good. Straight Jacket is great. She won an Oscar for Mildred Pierce in 1945, which is also absolutely fantastic. And so I'd be curious to see more of her early films, which the films themselves are not maybe as well known. And as we mentioned in our episode on The Ice Follies of 1939, which she's also in, I did watch Mommy Dearest recently, which I feel like that has maybe faded, but for a long time, because of Mommy Dearest, she was known less for her acting in all these great films and more for being this sort of like over the top, insane diva / abusive parent. And I think maybe that's faded enough that people are appreciating her acting ability more.
Yeah, I'll have to think on that, Josh. But I mean, the Jazz Singer, Grand Hotel, Johnny Guitar, and the Torch Song, right? Like, and you mentioned Mildred Pierce. That was like considered a comeback vehicle for her.
Right, which is only 6 years after this, but that is a great movie. So
look, as I said, I think there's no one better than Rosalind Russell as far as this fast, like screwball comedy, kind of we could give it as good as we get it style dialogue. And, she was nominated for 4 Academy Awards and she won a Tony. So, His Girl Friday is my pick, but I have not seen, Gypsy, Auntie Mamie, there's plenty of stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, and both her and Joan Crawford kept on working all the way into the 1970s, whether it was in, kind of B movies like Joan Crawford or in television, but their careers spanned this huge amount of time. I actually watched Auntie Mame recently to possibly use for an article that I didn't end up including it in, but man, if you think this movie is too much, Auntie Mame is just like 2.5 hours of Rosalind Russell like devouring the scenery, and it is exhausting. And it's something to see, but I'm not sure I really fully engaged with it.
Yeah, well, then I'm going to pass on that. I think we've probably mentioned Paulette Goddard when we have covered Chaplin because, they were a romantic item and she was the leading lady in Modern Times and The Great Dictator. So, and she also married Burgess Meredith. who I love from his work in Grumpy Old Men.
Yeah, she had quite the Hollywood romantic life. She married Charlie Chaplin, she married Burgess Meredith, and then she married Eric Maria Remarque, or however you pronounce his name, who's the author of All Quiet on the Western Front. So really, some major husbands there for Paulette Goddard. And once she married her third husband, basically retired, apart from a few occasional roles later. But by the late 50s, she was retired. So I feel like maybe in a way, like Norma Shearer, she's not as well remembered now, although people do remember her for those Chaplin movies.
Right. I think so. Joan Fontaine, of course, we all know because of her feud with Olivia de Havilland, which was that a Ryan Murphy thing? Did he make a series about that or anything?
No, he made the series about, I mean, going back to Joan Crawford, the first season of Feud was about her and Bette Davis with Jessica Lange as Joan Crawford. But Olivia de Havilland is like a supporting character in that. And I can't remember if Joan Fontaine shows up. Of course, they were sisters, Joan Fontaine and Olivia de Havilland, and were famous for being, I think, the only pair of siblings ever to both win acting Oscars or something like that.
Right. So Ben Affleck, you got some catching up to do, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And she's also the only person to ever win an Academy Award for acting in a Hitchcock film, at least the only actress.
Yeah, she won for Suspicion, although I feel like she's better known for Rebecca, the Hitchcock film, which is great, and she's fantastic in that. But another person who had an insanely long career, she was acting until 1994 in some TV roles. So amazing how long these actors work for, some of them.
Right. And I mean, you look through the rest because there's so many of them, but it's all like they did 100 movies in 4 years, right? We keep coming back to that theme that they just work constantly.
They did. And I mean, I think that's common for these actors in like the 30s and 40s. But the fact that that continued, maybe not at that pace, but that they continued working for, 50 years beyond that is amazing to me.
Josh, if it amazes you, then it's been all worth it for us.
Thank you. I did want to mention Clare Boothe, or Clare Boothe Loos, which was her married name. What a life this woman had. I mean, she was a hugely successful playwright, having written the play that this was based on, as well as a bunch of others. She was a novelist. She was a journalist. Later in her life, she was a member of Congress. She was the U.S. ambassador to Italy. She was a huge figure. It's interesting to me in like the conservative movement and the Republican Party later in her life. But, she was also known as a feminist pioneer. So she had this kind of duality to her that I think was really interesting. And also the fact that the perspective of this film, the message, as we see it, is like for Mary and for women in general, perhaps, to forgive husbands for straying and stay in their marriages. That's not something that she did. She was divorced and she married her second husband after he got divorced because he had an affair with her.
She's living a double life there, Josh.
Indeed.
Jane Murfin, the co-writer, also had an interesting life. She helped create the first major star that happened to be a dog named Strongheart. She wrote and produced films for Strongheart while living with Lawrence Trimble, who I believe was a big Hollywood exec or director.
I think that's the one thing that's going to get Dave's interest here.
Yeah, that was like the last thing I expected you to say right there.
I think, Dave, you need to go back and watch some of Jane Murfin's dog movies and let us know how those are.
We'll get an order.
I'm making a list right now.
We'll get an order of Pancakes Barbara and watch some Strongheart movies.
I look forward to that. So do you want to say anything else about the legacy of this movie, Jason?
No, Josh. I'm going to leave it with you, and you can keep watching it.
I will watch it again. I almost, when we were going to watch this, I almost bought it on Blu-ray or DVD because I figured I might as well own it, but it wouldn't have arrived in time for me to watch it for this podcast. But I would absolutely watch this movie again. I really enjoy it. So that is The Women, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can tell us about our adulterous affairs online and on social media.
Check out Josh's OnlyFans at the Women Fan #1. No, we're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on what I imagine Clare Boothe would love, the X platform.
Yeah.
So, and I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or Jay Harris Comedy on all the things. Also, find me on Letterboxd. Go for Jason.
You can find some old things from me, including the first thing I think I ever wrote about this movie at joshbellhateseverything.com. I'm at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on X, as well as on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd. And if you watch this movie or any of the movies we talk about and you review them on Letterboxd, tag it Awesome Movie Year. We're still trying to hear from you. We'd love to hear from you and your thoughts on the movies that we talk about. And you can listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod.
And Jason, what are we doing in our next episode?
Josh, are you in the mood for love?
Are we talking about In the Mood for Love, the Wong Kar-wai film?
No, but I would be happy to do that as well. But since it's around Valentine's Day, Josh, we're going with an all-time classic love affair film called Love Affair.
That will actually be on Valentine's Day, so tune in on Valentine's Day for Love Affair.
Hey, Josh, guess what?
What?
It's a better movie than this one.
And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.